For more videos on people's struggles, please subscribe to our YouTube channel.
It's been over 2 months since the beginning of the momentous uprising in Chile. This uprising began with a protest over a hike in metro fares and ended up as the largest mobilization in the country since the end of the civic-military dictatorship of Augusto Pinochet. The people of Chile had made it clear that it was structural change they wanted. In this episode of Around the World in 8 Minutes, we look at the situation in Chile now, as well as protests in Algeria and Poland. Keep watching. On December 18th, which marked 2 months since the beginning of the uprising, tens of thousands of people mobilized across the country, demanding the resignation of Sebastián Piñera and a new inclusive constitution through a national constituent assembly. In the capital Santiago, hundreds of people gathered at the iconic Dignity Plaza, formerly known as the Plaza Italia, and held a peaceful demonstration banging utensils to express their rejection of the government of President Piñera. The neoliberal model of governance that was pursued since the time of the dictatorship has intensified under Piñera's government, and hence, his resignation has been a major demand of the protesters. The Chilean police force, the Carabineros, responded brutally with tear gas and water cannons. This is a continuation of the brutality with which the state has responded to the legitimate demands of the protesters. According to the National Institute of Human Rights in Chile, between October 17th and December 12th, over 25 people have been killed, 9,308 people have been arrested, 1,434 people have been tortured or sexually harassed, and 3,461 have been injured. Additionally, over 357 people have suffered eye injuries and vision loss due to short-range firing by the security forces. However, the Chilean people have withstood this violence and are determined to see their demands achieved. The protesters are seeking a constitution that will reflect the demands for equity and justice that they have fought for. Under pressure from the protesters, the government gave in and agreed to start the process to draft a fresh constitution. However, even here, there was a catch. On November 15th, the ruling party and some opposition parties reached an agreement for a plebiscite to a new constitution in April 2020. Leftist and other progressive sections have rejected this agreement because it puts up even the question of the requirement of a new constitution to vote. Thus, there is no guarantee for the setting up of a new constituent assembly. The progressive movements of the country are also unhappy at there being no provisions for plurinational representation and gender parity in the new constituent assembly. The government's proposal has cleared some legislative barriers, but the left-wing proposals may still be approved. In the coming months, the popular movements of Chile will continue their struggle for a transformative and just constitution. We now move on to Algeria, which may have got a new president, but its people are really not happy. Abdelmadjid Tebboune was elected on December 12th, but the protesters of the country, who overthrew President Abdelaziz Bouteflika in April, see the new president as part of the same old regime. On December 17th, thousands took part in mass protests in the capital Algiers against the president. They also rejected his offer of talks. The protesters, especially those belonging to the Hirak movement, are demanding a complete break with the regime of Bouteflika. Abdelaziz Bouteflika was in power for 20 years and was considering a 5th term of president in the beginning of 2019. However, mass protests forced him to not only withdraw his candidature but also resign. Nonetheless, those involved in his regime continue to be in power. Tebboune himself was briefly prime minister during the Bouteflika era. The Hirak movement, which led the protests, had called for a boycott of the December 12th Algerian elections. Finally, only 39.9% of those eligible turned out to vote. Angry protesters ransacked police stations and there were reports of clashes between them and the police. Several protesters were also injured by rubber bullets fired by the security forces. Some protesters are believed to have been injured in their eyes and lost eyesight. It is clear that the Algerian protest movements are not in any mood to accept the continuation of the same old. Their protests are set to intensify in the coming future. We now go to Poland, where on December 18th, massive mobilizations took place in over 160 locations against the judicial reforms proposed by the far right-wing Law and Justice Party government. Thousands of people gathered in front of Poland's parliament in Warsaw and in many other towns and cities. The call for the protest was given by the Committee for the Defense of Democracy, the Judiciary Association, Instytuta Polska, the Citizens Movement ORP, and the Polish opposition parties, including Lewica, Razem, and Wiosna, which are all leftist organizations. Since coming to power in 2015, the PIS government in Poland has been actively pursuing drastic changes in the Polish judiciary. The government earlier lowered the retirement age of Supreme Court judges from 70 to 65. According to this law, only those judges deemed worthy would get a 5-year extension. This move was criticized as a bid to ensure the retirement of those judges who were not in ideological alignment with the government. In the latest move, the government has proposed lowering the retirement age for women judges to 60 and for male judges to 65, down from the current 67 in lower courts. The Justice Minister, who is appointed by the ruling party, would have the power to extend a judge's term. The most controversial proposal, introduced in Parliament on December 12th, enables the government to invoke disciplinary action against judges for acts or omissions that may prevent or significantly impede the functioning of the judicial reforms proposed by the government. The government also intends to take over the National Council of Judiciary, or known as KRS, the public body that is responsible for appointing judges. It has also proposed the restructuring of the courts and the Constitutional Tribunal. All these will reduce the possibility of any sort of resistance to this government, which has already gone ahead with major anti-labor reforms and is in the forefront of a very right-wing agenda in the country. Finally, December 19th saw massive protests across India, in which hundreds and thousands of people resisted a discriminatory Citizenship Amendment Act. The bid by the far right-wing government of India to divide people on the basis of religion and create a Hindu supremacist country has run into the united resistance of people of all religions. Especially encouraging was the large-scale participation of youth. And as in any protest where young people took part, there was no shortage of creative and funny posters and slogans at these protests. Here is a look at some of these powerful and funny posters that symbolize hope and the refusal to yield. That's all we have in this episode of Around the World in 8 Minutes. To know more about these stories, visit our website peoplesdispatch.org and follow us on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram.
Cantar que vamos a triunfar, avanza